The rain hammered against the grimy windows of Whitfield Manor, like an accusation, each droplet a reminder of the tears that Carol Whitfield had long since stopped shedding. At 24, she moved through the grand corridors of her family's estate like a ghost haunting her own life, invisible to those who shared her blood, yet treated her as less than a servant. The irony was not lost on her that she bore the family name, but had never truly belonged to the family itself. A bastard daughter acknowledged only because the law demanded it, tolerated only because abandoning her completely would have caused scandal. Her father, Lord Whitfield, looked through her as if she were made of glass, while her stepmother, Lady Margaret, spoke to her only to issue commands or corrections. Her half-siblings, legitimate heirs to the family fortune and affection, had learned early to echo their parents' indifference, treating Carol as an unfortunate necessity rather than a sister. For 24 years, she had lived in this beautiful prison, surrounded by luxury she could never truly claim, educated alongside children who would inherit everything, while she would inherit nothing but the bitter knowledge that she was unwanted. She had grown accustomed to silence, to making herself small, to accepting that love was a privilege reserved for others. But tonight, as she stood in the shadows of the grand staircase, listening to her family discuss her future as if she were a piece of furniture to be disposed of, Carol felt something stir within her that she had thought long dead, a spark of rebellion, a whisper of hope that perhaps there was more to life than this endless grey existence. She didn't know that in just 3 days, her world would be turned upside down by a chance encounter with a man who would see her not as the unwanted daughter, not as the family burden, but as a woman of extraordinary worth who deserved to be cherished. She didn't know that the Duke of Halbrook, a man renowned throughout England for his unwavering honour and fierce sense of justice, would look into her eyes and see not the broken girl her family had tried to create, but the strong, dignified woman she had become despite their cruelty. She didn't know that love, real love, was about to find her in the most unexpected way, proving that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the darkest places, and that the heart has an infinite capacity to heal when it finally finds someone who sees its true value. The unwanted daughter. The morning sun cast long shadows across the breakfast room of Whitfield Manor, but its warmth never seemed to reach Carol Whitfield as she sat at the far end of the table, as distant from her family as propriety would allow. At 24, Carol possessed a quiet beauty that her family seemed determined to ignore. Auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper, intelligent green eyes that held depths of understanding beyond her years, and delicate features that spoke of gentle strength rather than weakness. But in this house, beauty without legitimacy was merely another burden to bear. "Carol," Lady Margaret's voice cut through the morning silence like a blade. "You'll accompany me to the charity luncheon today. Lady Pemberton specifically requested additional help with the arrangements." Carol looked up from her barely touched breakfast, her hands steady, despite the familiar sting of being treated as unpaid help rather than family. "Of course, stepmother." "Oh, and do try to make yourself useful," added her half-sister Victoria, a blonde beauty of 22 who had inherited their father's sense of entitlement along with his blue eyes. Lady Pemberton was quite clear that she needed someone reliable, not someone who might embarrass the family name. Carol's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she had learned long ago that defending herself only brought more cruelty. "I understand." Lord Whitfield didn't even look up from his newspaper, his silence more cutting than any words could have been. To him, Carol was a reminder of a youthful indiscretion, a living proof of his moral failing that he preferred to ignore rather than address. "The Duchess of Halbrook will be attending," Lady Margaret continued, her voice taking on the reverent tone she reserved for discussing the nobility. "Her son, the Duke, may accompany her. You are to remain in the background, Carol. The last thing we need is for you to draw unwanted attention to yourself." Carol nodded, accustomed to being told to make herself invisible. She had perfected the art of blending into the background, of moving through social gatherings like a shadow, useful when needed but otherwise forgotten. After breakfast, as Carol prepared for the luncheon in her small, simply furnished room, a space that felt more like servants' quarters than the bedroom of a family member, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her wore a dress of modest grey silk, appropriate for her station, but designed to ensure she would never outshine her legitimate family members. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple style that emphasized her fine bone structure, and her green eyes held a sadness that had become as much a part of her as breathing. "You are enough," she whispered to her reflection, a daily affirmation that had become both prayer and rebellion. "You are worthy of love, even if they cannot see it." It was a ritual she had developed over the years, a way of preserving some small piece of her self-worth in a house designed to strip it away. She had learned that if she didn't value herself, no one else would. The charity luncheon was held at Pemberton House, a grand estate that rivaled Whitfield Manor in its opulence. Carol arrived with her family, but immediately separated from them, making her way to the servants' area, where Lady Pemberton had arranged for her to help with the final preparations. "Ah, Miss Whitfield," Lady Pemberton greeted her with the kind of smile reserved for useful but unimportant people. "How good of your family to lend us your assistance. We're expecting quite a crowd today, including some very distinguished guests." Carol curtsied appropriately. "I'm happy to help in any way I can, my lady." And for the next hour, Carol worked quietly and efficiently, arranging flowers, ensuring place settings were perfect, and handling the dozens of small details that made such events successful. She had a natural grace and attention to detail that made her invaluable for such occasions, though she was rarely thanked for her efforts. As the guests began to arrive, Carol retreated to her assigned position near the servants' entrance, where she could observe the proceedings without being observed herself. She watched as her family mingled with London's elite, her stepmother preening in her role as a respected society matron, her half-siblings charming potential suitors and social connections. "The Duke of Halbrook," the butler announced, and Carol looked up to see a man who immediately commanded attention without seeming to seek it. Duke Harry Halbrook was 32 years old and possessed the kind of presence that came not from arrogance, but from genuine confidence and integrity. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and penetrating blue eyes, he moved through the crowd with easy grace, greeting acquaintances warmly, but without the artificial charm that characterized so many of his peers. There was something solid about him, something that spoke of a man who had never compromised his principles for convenience. Carol found herself watching him more closely than she should have, fascinated by the way he seemed to truly listen when people spoke to him, the way his smile reached his eyes, the way he treated servants with the same courtesy he showed to duchesses. In a world where social position determined worth, he seemed to see people as individuals rather than titles. "Miss Whitfield," Carol started, realizing that Lady Pemberton was speaking to her. "Yes, my lady. The Duke's tea has gone cold. Please bring him a fresh cup." Carol's heart skipped a beat. She had been specifically told to remain invisible, but now she was being asked to approach the most distinguished guest at the luncheon. "Of course, my lady." With hands that trembled only slightly, Carol prepared a fresh cup of tea, ensuring it was perfect before making her way across the room toward where the Duke stood in conversation with several other gentlemen. "Ta, Your Grace," she said softly, offering a small curtsy. "Fresh tea, if you please." Harry turned toward her, and for a moment their eyes met. Carol felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition that went beyond the simple exchange of servant and master. His blue eyes were kind, intelligent, and seemed to see far more than she was comfortable revealing. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "True, that's very thoughtful." As he took the cup from her hands, their fingers brushed briefly, and Carol felt a jolt of electricity that she had never experienced before. She quickly lowered her eyes, preparing to retreat, but his voice stopped her. I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Harry Halbrook." Carol's eyes widened in surprise. Dukes did not introduce themselves to servants, and they certainly didn't use their given names. "Carol Whitfield, Your Grace." "Whitfield," he repeated thoughtfully. "You're related to Lord Whitfield?" "His daughter, Your Grace." The words came out more quietly than she intended, carrying with them all the complicated emotions that relationship entailed. Harry's expression shifted slightly, and Carol wondered what he had heard about her family situation. The ton loved gossip, and her status as Lord Whitfield's acknowledged but unwanted daughter was hardly a secret. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Whitfield," he said, and something in his tone suggested he meant it. Before Carol could respond, Lady Margaret appeared at her elbow like a storm cloud. "Your Grace, I do hope my stepdaughter hasn't been bothering you. Carol, you're needed in the kitchen." The dismissal was sharp and humiliating, designed to remind both Carol and the Duke of her place in the social hierarchy. Carol felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she curtsied again and prepared to leave. "Actually," Harry said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came with his title, "Miss Whitfield and I were having a pleasant conversation. I was just about to ask her opinion on the charity work being discussed today." Lady Margaret's smile became strained. "Oh, I'm sure Carol has nothing of value to add to such important discussions, Your Grace. She's much better suited to practical matters." Carol felt the familiar sting of being dismissed as worthless, but something in the Duke's expression gave her courage. "I believe education for underprivileged children is one of the most important investments we can make in our society's future, Your Grace," she said quietly but clearly. Knowledge has the power to break cycles of poverty and create opportunities where none existed before." Harry's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Are exactly my thoughts, Miss Whitfield. Too many people see charity as simply providing temporary relief rather than addressing root causes." Lady Margaret looked as if she had swallowed something unpleasant, but she could hardly contradict a duke in public. "Yes? Well, I'm sure you have many important matters to discuss with the other guests, Your Grace." "Indeed I do," Harry agreed, but his eyes remained on Carol. "Perhaps we might continue this conversation another time, Miss Whitfield. I'd be very interested in hearing more of your thoughts on education reform." Carol's heart raced. Was the Duke of Halbrook actually expressing interest in her opinions? "I would be honored, Your Grace." As Lady Margaret practically dragged her away, Carol caught one last glimpse of the Duke watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For the first time in her life, someone had not only listened to her thoughts, but seemed to value them. The rest of the luncheon passed in a blur. Carol performed her duties mechanically, while her mind replayed every moment of her conversation with the Duke. She had never experienced anything like the way he had looked at her, not with pity or condescension, but with genuine interest and respect. On the carriage ride home, her family's mood was decidedly sour. "I cannot believe you spoke to the Duke without permission," Lady Margaret hissed. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" "He spoke to me first," Carol said quietly. "I was merely being polite." "Polite would have been knowing your place," Victoria added venomously. "The Duke was simply being kind to a servant. You shouldn't have presumed it meant anything more." Lord Whitfield finally spoke, his voice cold and cutting. "You will not put yourself forward in such a manner again, Carol. Your position in this family is precarious enough without you embarrassing us in front of our betters." Carol stared out the carriage window, watching the countryside roll by. But she couldn't stop thinking about the way the Duke had said her name, the way he had defended her right to express her opinions, the way he had looked at her as if she mattered. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her as more than the unwanted daughter, more than a burden to be endured. Someone had seen her as a person worthy of respect and consideration. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, Carol allowed herself to hope, just a little, that perhaps her life might hold more possibilities than she had ever dared to imagine. She didn't know that across London, the Duke of Halbrook was lying awake thinking about a young woman with intelligent green eyes and a quiet dignity that had impressed him more than all the artificial charm of the Ton's most celebrated beauties. She didn't know that he had already decided to learn more about Carol Whitfield and the family that seemed so determined to diminish her light. And she certainly didn't know that her life was about to change in ways she had never dreamed possible. The Duke's inquiry. Harry Halbrook sat in his study the morning after the charity luncheon, but his mind was not on the estate reports spread across his mahogany desk. Instead, he found himself thinking about a young woman with auburn hair and eyes that held depths of intelligence and pain that troubled him deeply. "Your Grace?" His secretary, Mr. Thompson, stood in the doorway with a stack of correspondence. "The morning post has arrived, and there are several matters requiring your immediate attention." "Of course, Thompson. Please come in." Harry gestured to the chair across from his desk, but his thoughts remained elsewhere. "Tell me, what do you know about the Whitfield family?" Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Lord Whitfield, Your Grace? He's well regarded in Parliament, though some consider his politics rather conservative. His estate is profitable, and his family is well connected socially. And his family situation." Thompson hesitated, recognizing the careful tone that meant his employer was seeking specific information for specific reasons. "Lord Whitfield has 2 legitimate children with his current wife, Lady Margaret. There is also a daughter from a previous relationship, Miss Carol Whitfield. Das. Tell me about her." "Das. She's acknowledged, but not fully accepted, if you understand my meaning, Your Grace." She lives at Whitfield Manor, but is treated more as a dependent than a true family member. There have been rumors over the years about her treatment, though nothing that would cause scandal. Harry's jaw tightened. But what kind of treatment? She's educated but not launched into society. She attends family functions but in a subsidiary capacity. Some say she's more servant than daughter, though she bears the family name. The more Harry heard, the more his anger grew. Not the hot, explosive anger of youth, but the cold, determined anger of a man who had seen injustice and would not stand for it. Has she any prospects, any independence? None that I'm aware of, Your Grace. Lord Whitfield has made no provision for her future, and without a dowry or family support, her options are quite limited. Harry was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. He had been struck not only by Carol's beauty, but by her intelligence and dignity in the face of what was clearly a difficult situation. The way her family had treated her at the luncheon had been appalling, and now he understood it was part of a larger pattern of neglect and cruelty. Thompson, I want you to make some discreet inquiries. I want to know more about Miss Whitfield's situation, her education, her interests, her circumstances. But I want this done carefully. I don't want to cause her any additional difficulties. Of course, Your Grace. Might I ask? Harry met his secretary's curious gaze steadily. I met Miss Whitfield yesterday, and I was impressed by her character and intelligence. I believe she deserves better than her current circumstances. Thompson nodded, understanding. The Duke of Halbrook was known throughout England for his sense of justice and his willingness to help those who could not help themselves. If he had taken an interest in Miss Whitfield's welfare, it was because he saw something worth protecting. I'll begin immediately, Your Grace. After Thompson left, Harry stood and walked to the window overlooking his estate's gardens. He had inherited his title at 25 when his father died unexpectedly, and in the 7 years since, he had worked tirelessly to be worthy of the responsibility. He had seen too much of the world's cruelty and injustice to ignore it when it appeared in his own sphere. But his interest in Carol Whitfield went beyond simple charity. There had been something about her, a strength that persisted despite obvious adversity, an intelligence that shone through despite attempts to diminish it, a dignity that remained intact despite years of being told she was worthless. He had met countless beautiful women, had been pursued by ambitious mothers and charming daughters seeking advantageous marriages, but none of them had affected him the way Carol Whitfield had, with her quiet grace and thoughtful opinions on education reform. Your Grace, his butler Stevens appeared in the doorway. The Duchess of Pemberton is here to see you. Harry suppressed a sigh. The Duchess was his mother's closest friend, and had appointed herself his unofficial matchmaker since his mother's death 3 years ago. Show her in, Stevens. The Duchess swept into the room in a rustle of silk and determination. Harry, my dear boy, you look well. I trust you enjoyed yesterday's luncheon. It was quite enlightening, Your Grace. Good, good. I particularly wanted you to meet the Pemberton girl. Such a lovely creature, and so accomplished. Perfect Duchess material, if I may say so. Harry had barely noticed the Pemberton girl, his attention having been captured entirely by a certain auburn-haired young woman who had been treated as invisible by everyone else present. I'm sure she's charming, he said diplomatically. She is indeed, and so suitable. I was thinking we might arrange a dinner party, give you a chance to know her better in a more intimate setting. That's very kind of you, but I'm not currently seeking a wife. The Duchess looked at him with the expression of someone who had heard this excuse many times before. Harry, you're 32 years old and one of the most eligible bachelors in England. You have a duty to marry and produce an heir. I'm well aware of my duties, Your Grace. When I marry, it will be for love, not obligation. Love? The Duchess laughed as if he had made a joke. My dear boy, love is a luxury for poets and shopkeepers. People of our station marry for alliance, for property, for the continuation of bloodlines. Love, if it comes at all, comes after. Harry thought of his parents, who had married for duty but had grown to love each other deeply over the years. He also thought of Carol Whitfield, and wondered if she had ever been loved by anyone in her life. Perhaps, he said carefully, but I believe it's possible to find both love and suitability in the same person. Well, of course, if you're fortunate. But you mustn't be too particular, Harry. The right kind of wife, well-born, well-educated, well-connected, can be trained to be everything you need. The casual way she spoke of training a wife like a pet made Harry's stomach turn. I prefer to think of marriage as a partnership between equals, Your Grace. The Duchess looked at him as if he had grown a second head. Are equals? Harry, really? A wife should be accomplished and decorative, certainly, but equal. That's a rather radical notion. After the Duchess left, still muttering about his radical notions, Harry returned to his desk with renewed determination. He would learn more about Carol Whitfield, and if she was indeed being mistreated by her family, he would find a way to help her. 2 days later, Thompson returned with his report. Miss Whitfield is 24 years old, Your Grace. She was educated alongside her half-siblings by private tutors, and by all accounts, she was the most gifted student. She speaks French and Italian fluently, plays the pianoforte beautifully, and has read extensively in literature, history, and philosophy. And yet, she's treated as a servant in her own home. Indeed, Your Grace, she has no allowance, no social connections of her own, and no prospects for marriage. Her family uses her as unpaid help for their social obligations, but gives her no credit or recognition for her contributions. Harry's anger grew with each detail. What of her mother? Died when Miss Whitfield was very young, Your Grace. She was not of Lord Whitfield's social station. A governess, I believe, though a well-educated one. Lord Whitfield acknowledged the child, but has never shown her any affection. And her current living situation? She has a small room in the servants' quarters, though she takes her meals with the family when they're not entertaining. She's essentially a dependent with no legal protections and no means of independence. Harry was quiet for a long moment, processing the full scope of Carol's situation. She was trapped in a life that offered her no hope of improvement, surrounded by people who seemed determined to break her spirit. Thompson, I want you to arrange something for me. I'm going to call on the Whitfield family, a social call, perfectly proper. I want to see Miss Whitfield again and assess her situation firsthand. And of course, Your Grace, shall I send word ahead? Yes, but make it clear that I'm calling on the family as a whole. I don't want them to suspect my particular interest in Miss Whitfield's welfare. That evening, as Harry prepared for dinner, he found himself thinking about Carol's eyes, the intelligence that shone through despite obvious pain, the dignity that persisted despite years of being told she was worthless. He had met many women who had been born to privilege and had never known a day of hardship, but none of them had impressed him as much as a young woman who had maintained her grace and strength in the face of constant adversity. He didn't know yet that he was falling in love with her. He only knew that he couldn't stop thinking about her, and that he was determined to find a way to give her the life she deserved, a life filled with the love and respect that had been denied her for far too long. Tomorrow, he would begin his campaign to win not just her heart, but her freedom from a family that had never deserved her. The unexpected visitor. The news that the Duke of Halbrook would be calling on the Whitfield family sent the household into a frenzy of preparation. Lady Margaret spent the morning issuing orders to servants, rearranging furniture, and ensuring that every surface gleamed with polish. Victoria and her brother Charles practiced their most charming conversation, while Lord Whitfield retreated to his study to avoid the chaos. Carol watched the preparations from the shadows, as she always did. She had been assigned to help with the arrangements, but was repeatedly reminded to make herself scarce once the Duke arrived. "Remember, Carol," Lady Margaret said for the third time that morning, "you are to remain in the background. The Duke is here to visit with the family, not to be bothered by peripheral members of the household." Carol nodded, accustomed to being described as peripheral in her own home. But despite her family's dismissive attitude, she couldn't stop thinking about her brief conversation with the Duke at the charity luncheon. He had listened to her opinions as if they mattered, had looked at her as if she were a person worthy of respect. "I still can't believe he spoke to you at Lady Pemberton's," Victoria said, adjusting her hair in the mirror for the dozenth time. "He was probably just being polite to a servant. You shouldn't read anything into it." And I didn't read anything into it," Carol replied quietly, though her heart knew otherwise. "Good, because today he'll see what a real lady looks like," Victoria continued, admiring her reflection. "I've heard he's looking for a wife. Imagine being a duchess." So Carol felt an unexpected stab of something that might have been jealousy, though she quickly pushed it aside. What right did she have to such feelings? The Duke was so far above her station that even entertaining romantic thoughts about him was foolish. When the Duke's carriage arrived that afternoon, Carol was stationed in the servants' hall, close enough to hear what transpired, but far enough away to remain invisible. She listened as Stevens, their butler, announced the Duke's arrival, and heard the rustle of silk as her family arranged themselves in the drawing room. "Your Grace," Lord Whitfield's voice carried clearly through the open doors. What an honor to have you visit our humble home. The pleasure is mine, Lord Whitfield. I hope I'm not intruding. Even from a distance, the Duke's voice sent a shiver through Carol. There was something about its deep, warm tone that made her feel things she had no right to feel. Not at all, Your Grace, Lady Margaret gushed. Please, do sit down. May I present my children? This is my daughter Victoria and my son Charles. Carol could imagine Victoria's perfect curtsy and Charles's practiced bow. They had been trained from birth for moments like this, while she had been trained to remain invisible. Charmed, the Duke said politely. I was hoping to thank your family properly for the assistance provided at Lady Pemberton's charity luncheon. The organization was flawless. Oh, that was nothing, Your Grace, Lady Margaret replied. We're always happy to support worthy causes. Indeed. I was particularly impressed by the thoughtful insights shared about education reform, quite progressive thinking. There was a moment of silence, and Carol could imagine her family's confusion. None of them had expressed any opinions about education reform. I believe, the Duke continued, round it was Miss Whitfield who shared those thoughts. Is she not at home today? Carol's heart stopped. He was asking about her specifically. She heard Lady Margaret's sharp intake of breath and could picture her stepmother's struggle to maintain composure. She's attending to household matters, Your Grace. I'm sure she would be mortified to think you remembered such a trivial conversation. Trivial? The Duke's voice carried a note of surprise. I found her insights quite valuable. In fact, I was hoping to continue our discussion. Might she be available to join us? Carol pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. The Duke of Halbrook was specifically requesting her presence. It was unprecedented, impossible, wonderful, and terrifying all at once. Of course, Your Grace, Lady Margaret stammered. Charles, please ask Carol to join us. Charles appeared in the servants' hall moments later, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. The Duke wants to see you, he said curtly. God knows why. Try not to embarrass us. Carol's hands shook as she smoothed her simple grey dress and checked her reflection in the small mirror by the servants' entrance. She looked pale but composed, her auburn hair neatly arranged and her green eyes bright with nervous anticipation. When she entered the drawing room, the Duke rose immediately, a courtesy that shocked her family and made her heart race. He was even more handsome than she remembered, tall and distinguished in his perfectly tailored coat, his blue eyes warm and welcoming. Miss Whitfield, he said, offering a slight bow that made Victoria's eyes widen in disbelief. Thank you for joining us. I hope I haven't interrupted anything important. Not at all, Your Grace, Carol managed, offering a curtsy that she hoped was appropriate. You honor us with your visit. Please, sit down, he said, gesturing to a chair near where he had been seated. I was just telling your family how much I enjoyed our conversation about education reform. I've been thinking about your comments regarding the importance of addressing root causes rather than merely providing temporary relief. Carol sat carefully, aware that her entire family was staring at her with varying degrees of shock and disapproval. You're very kind to remember, Your Grace. Kindness has nothing to do with it. Your insights were genuinely valuable. He leaned forward slightly, his attention focused entirely on her. I've been working with several charitable organizations that focus on education for underprivileged children. I'd be very interested in your thoughts on how we might improve our approaches. For the next hour, Carol found herself in the most extraordinary conversation of her life. The Duke didn't just listen to her opinions, he engaged with them, challenged them, built upon them. He treated her as an intellectual equal, something that had never happened to her before. I believe, Carol said, growing more confident as the conversation progressed, that education must be practical as well as academic. Teaching children to read and write is wonderful, but they also need skills that will allow them to support themselves and their families. Exactly. Harry's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. I've been trying to convince the board of one of my charities to include vocational training in their programs. Your argument about practical application is precisely what they need to hear. Carol has always been rather bookish, Lady Margaret interjected, her tone suggesting this was not entirely a compliment. We've tried to encourage more feminine pursuits, but she seems to prefer reading to more suitable activities. Harry's expression cooled slightly as he turned to Lady Margaret. I find intelligence in a woman to be one of the most attractive qualities possible. Miss Whitfield's insights suggest a mind that would be wasted on purely decorative pursuits. The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable, and Carol felt a warm glow of vindication. Someone was defending her intelligence, her worth, her right to have opinions and express them. "Of course, Your Grace," Lady Margaret said quickly, though her smile was strained. "We're very proud of Carol's accomplishments." The lie hung in the air like a bad smell, and Carol saw the Duke's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He was too polite to contradict his hostess directly, but his disapproval was clear. "Miss Whitfield," he said, turning back to her, "I'm hosting a small gathering next week to discuss educational reform with several like-minded individuals. Would you be interested in attending? Your perspectives would add greatly to our discussions." The room fell silent. Carol felt as if the world had stopped spinning. The Duke of Holbrook was inviting her to a social gathering, treating her as if she were someone whose opinions mattered, someone worth including in important discussions. I would be honored, Your Grace," she managed, though she could feel her family's shock radiating around her like heat from a fire. "Excellent. I'll send details to your family." He stood, and everyone else rose as well. "Thank you for a delightful afternoon. Lord Whitfield, Lady Margaret, it's been a pleasure. Miss Victoria, Mr. Charles, charming to meet you both." He turned to Carol last, and for a moment they were simply looking at each other, the rest of the room fading into insignificance. "Miss Whitfield, I look forward to continuing our conversation next week." "As do I, Your Grace." After the Duke left, the drawing room erupted in chaos. "I cannot believe what just happened," Victoria said, her voice shrill with disbelief. "He barely spoke to me, and I'm the legitimate daughter." "This is intolerable," Charles added. "Carol is making us look ridiculous. People will think we can't control our own household." Lord Whitfield's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Carol, you will not attend the Duke's gathering." Carol felt as if she had been slapped. "Father, he specifically invited me. It would be rude to decline." "But you will decline," Lord Whitfield said coldly. "You are not equipped to move in such circles, and I will not have you embarrassing this family further." "How would accepting an invitation from a duke embarrass the family?" Carol asked, her voice stronger than she felt. "Because you are not a real member of this family," Lady Margaret snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You are here on sufferance, Carol. You have no rights, no position, no claim to anything beyond what we choose to give you. The Duke may be amusing himself with your little opinions, but he will never see you as anything more than a curiosity." The words hit Carol like physical blows, but something had changed in her during the Duke's visit. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her worth, had valued her thoughts, had treated her with respect. She would not let her family take that away from her. "The Duke has invited me as his guest," she said quietly but firmly. "I intend to accept that invitation." "And then you can find somewhere else to live," Lord Whitfield said, his voice deadly calm. "I will not have defiance in my house." Carol felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had no money, no connections, nowhere to go. But as she thought of the way the Duke had looked at her, the way he had listened to her opinions as if they mattered, she found a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Then I suppose I'll have to find somewhere else to live," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. As she walked from the room, leaving her family in stunned silence, Carol felt terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. She had finally stood up for herself, had finally claimed her worth. She didn't know how she would manage, where she would go, or what would happen next. But for the first time in her life, she had chosen herself over the approval of people who had never valued her anyway. And somehow, she knew that the Duke of Holbrook would understand. The rescue. Carol spent that night packing her few belongings into a small traveling bag, her hands trembling not with fear but with a strange sense of liberation. For 24 years, she had lived under the suffocating weight of her family's disapproval, accepting their judgment that she was worth nothing. But the Duke's visit had shown her a different possibility, a world where her thoughts mattered, where her intelligence was valued, where she might be seen as more than an unwanted burden. She had perhaps £10 saved from the small allowance Lady Margaret occasionally gave her for personal expenses, enough for a few nights at a modest inn while she figured out what to do next. She could seek employment as a governess or companion, though without references from her family it would be difficult. As dawn broke over Whitfield Manor, Carol made her way quietly down the servants' stairs, hoping to leave without confrontation. But Lady Margaret was waiting for her in the kitchen, her face a mask of cold fury. "So you're actually going through with this foolishness," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? The roof over your head? The food on your table, the protection of the Whitfield name. Well, I'm throwing away a life where I'm treated as less than human, Carol replied, surprised by her own calm. I'd rather face uncertainty than continue living as your unpaid servant. An unpaid servant? Lady Margaret's voice rose. You ungrateful girl. We've clothed you, fed you, educated you. As praise, you've done the bare minimum required by law and common decency, Carol interrupted, her green eyes flashing. And you've made sure I never forgot that even that was more than I deserved. You'll be back, Lady Margaret said with vicious certainty. When you're hungry and cold and realize that no one else will take you in, you'll come crawling back. And when you do, you'll find your position here much less comfortable than it was before. Carol lifted her chin with a dignity that made Lady Margaret's eyes narrow. I won't be back. I'd rather starve than spend another day in a house where I'm not wanted. She walked out of Whitfield Manor without looking back, her small bag in hand and her head held high. The morning air was crisp and clean, and despite her uncertain future, Carol felt lighter than she had in years. Her first stop was the village inn, where she secured a small room for 3 nights, all she could afford. The innkeeper's wife, Mrs. Davies, was kind and asked no uncomfortable questions about why a young lady was traveling alone with so little luggage. Just passing through, dear? She asked, as she showed Carol to her room. Something like that, Carol replied. I'm between situations at the moment. Mrs. Davies nodded with understanding. She had seen enough of life to recognize someone in difficult circumstances. Well, you're welcome here as long as you need, and if you're looking for work there might be opportunities in the village. Mrs. Henderson at the school has been looking for someone to help with the younger children. Thank you, Carol said gratefully. That's very kind. That afternoon, Carol walked through the village trying to plan her next steps. She had never been entirely on her own before, and the freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice the elegant carriage that had stopped beside her. Miss Whitfield? Carol looked up to see the Duke of Holbrook leaning out of his carriage window, his blue eyes filled with concern. Her heart leaped at the sight of him, though she felt embarrassed to be seen in her current circumstances. Your Grace, she said, offering a curtsy. What brings you to our village? I was calling on your family to finalize arrangements for next week's gathering, he said, his eyes taking in her traveling dress and the small bag in her hand. But they informed me that you were no longer in residence. Carol felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. I see. I hope that won't inconvenience your plans. Harry studied her face carefully, noting the proud tilt of her chin despite her obvious distress. Miss Whitfield, might I ask where you're staying? And at the inn, Your Grace. Temporarily. I see. He was quiet for a moment, and Carol could see him processing the implications of her situation. Would you allow me to drive you back to the inn? I'd like to speak with you if I may. Carol hesitated. Accepting a ride from the Duke would certainly cause talk in the village, but she was too tired and overwhelmed to care about propriety. That's very kind, Your Grace. But Harry helped her into the carriage, his touch gentle and respectful. Once they were settled, he studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Miss Whitfield, forgive my directness, but did your family ask you to leave because of my invitation? Carol considered lying, but something about his honest blue eyes made deception impossible. They forbade me to accept your invitation. When I refused to comply, they made it clear I was no longer welcome in their home. Harry's jaw tightened, and Carol saw a flash of anger in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. They threw you out for accepting a social invitation? They threw me out for defying them, Carol corrected quietly. Oh, it was bound to happen eventually. I've been living on borrowed time for years. This is unconscionable, Harry said, his voice tight with controlled fury. You're their daughter, for God's sake. I'm their burden, Carol said simply. There's a difference. The carriage had reached the inn, but Harry made no move to help her down. Instead, he turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Miss Whitfield, I want you to know that what's happened is not your fault. You did nothing wrong by accepting my invitation or by standing up for yourself. Thank you, Your Grace. That means more to me than you know. I also want you to know that my invitation stands, regardless of your family's disapproval. In fact, I'd like to extend it further. Carol's heart began to race. Your Grace? And I have a proposition for you. My estate includes several charitable organizations, including schools for underprivileged children. I need someone intelligent and compassionate to help oversee these programs. Someone who understands both the practical and philosophical aspects of education reform. Carol stared at him in disbelief. Are you offering me employment? I'm offering you a position that would make use of your considerable talents while providing you with independence and security. You would have your own cottage on the estate, a generous salary, and the opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of children who need advocates. Your Grace, I don't know what to say. Why would you do this for me? Harry was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Because you deserve better than what you've been given, because your intelligence and compassion are gifts that should be nurtured, not suppressed, and because I believe you could do extraordinary things if given the opportunity. Carol felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her with such respect, such confidence in her abilities. I would be honored to accept, Your Grace, but are you certain this is appropriate? What will people say about your employing someone who's been cast off by her own family? Let them say what they will, Harry said firmly. I employ people based on their merit, not their family connections. And anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to take their opinions elsewhere. The strength in his voice, the unwavering support, made Carol feel something she had never experienced before, the sense of being truly valued and protected. When would you like me to start? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow, if you're willing. I'll have a carriage sent to collect you and your belongings. Mrs. Henderson, who manages the estate cottages, will help you get settled. As Harry helped her down from the carriage, his hand lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. Miss Whitfield, I want you to know that this is not charity. You'll be earning your position through your own efforts and abilities. I have complete confidence that you'll exceed my expectations. Thank you, Your Grace, Carol said, her voice thick with emotion. I promise I won't disappoint you. You couldn't possibly disappoint me, Harry said softly, and something in his tone made Carol's heart skip a beat. That night, as Carol lay in her narrow bed at the inn, she could hardly believe how dramatically her life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been the unwanted daughter, invisible and worthless. Today, she was about to begin a new life where her abilities would be valued, where she would have purpose and independence. But more than that, she was about to be near the Duke of Halbrook every day, the man who had seen her worth when no one else could, who had rescued her not just from poverty, but from a life of endless diminishment. She didn't dare hope that his interest in her went beyond professional respect, but she couldn't deny the way her heart raced when he looked at her, the way his voice made her feel things she had never experienced before. Tomorrow, she would begin a new chapter of her life, and for the first time since childhood, she was excited about what the future might hold. A new beginning. Halbrook Estate was even more magnificent than Carol had imagined. As the Duke's carriage rolled up the tree-lined drive, she caught glimpses of manicured gardens, rolling green lawns, and a house that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. But what struck her most was not the grandeur, but the sense of life and purpose that seemed to emanate from every corner of the estate. "Welcome to Halbrook, Miss Whitfield," Harry said as the carriage came to a stop before the main house. "I hope you'll be happy here." "It's beautiful, Your Grace," Carol breathed, taking in the honey-colored stone and tall windows that seemed to welcome the morning sunlight. "Let me show you to your cottage first, and then we'll tour the schools and discuss your responsibilities." The cottage that was to be Carol's new home was a charming stone building nestled among oak trees, with a small garden and windows that looked out over the estate's parkland. It was modest, but comfortable, with a sitting room, a bedroom, a small kitchen, and most importantly, a study lined with empty bookshelves waiting to be filled. "It's perfect," Carol said, running her fingers along the smooth wood of the writing desk positioned beneath the window. "I can hardly believe it's mine." "It's yours for as long as you wish to stay," Harry said, watching her face as she explored her new home. "Mrs. Henderson has stocked the kitchen and arranged for a maid to come twice a week to help with cleaning, but otherwise your time is your own when you're not working." Carol turned to face him, her green eyes bright with gratitude and something else, a warmth that made Harry's heart race. "Your Grace, I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity. You've given me more than just employment. You've given me hope." You don't need to thank me, Carol," Harry said softly, using her given name for the first time. You're going to earn every bit of this through your own efforts." The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through Carol that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. There was something intimate about the way he said it, something that suggested she was more to him than just an employee. "Now," Harry continued, his tone becoming more businesslike though his eyes remained warm, "let me show you the schools and introduce you to the staff. The tour that followed opened Carol's eyes to the scope of Harry's charitable work. There were 3 schools on the estate, one for the children of estate workers, one for local children whose families couldn't afford education, and one specifically for girls who showed academic promise but lacked the social connections to pursue higher learning. "This is revolutionary," Carol said as they walked through the girls' school, watching young women engaged in lessons that ranged from literature to mathematics to natural sciences. "I've never seen anything like it." "Our education shouldn't be limited by gender or social class," Harry replied. "These girls are just as capable as any young man at Oxford or Cambridge. They simply need the opportunity to prove it." Carol felt her admiration for him grow with every word. Here was a man who didn't just talk about justice and equality, he actively worked to create it. "Your role," Harry explained as they continued the tour, will be to coordinate between the 3 schools, develop new curricula based on your insights about practical education, and serve as an advocate for the students. You'll also help me evaluate requests for funding from other educational charities." "It sounds wonderful," Carol said, her mind already racing with possibilities. "When do I start?" "And right now, if you'd like. Miss Thompson, the head mistress of the girls' school, has been waiting to meet you." Miss Thompson proved to be a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. "Miss Whitfield, His Grace has told me so much about you. I understand you have some innovative ideas about education reform." For the next hour, Carol found herself in animated discussion with Miss Thompson and the other teachers, sharing her thoughts about combining academic learning with practical skills, about the importance of building confidence alongside knowledge, about creating opportunities for students to apply their learning in real-world situations. "Brilliant," Miss Thompson exclaimed when Carol finished outlining her ideas for a program that would pair older students with younger ones as mentors. "This could transform how we approach education here." Harry watched from across the room, his heart swelling with pride and something deeper as he saw Carol come alive in her element. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm, her hands moved expressively as she spoke, and her entire being seemed to radiate intelligence and passion. "She's remarkable," Miss Thompson said quietly, moving to stand beside him. "I can see why you were so eager to bring her here. She has a natural gift for this work." "Yes," Harry agreed, his voice softer than he intended. "She does." Miss Thompson glanced at him with the knowing look of a woman who had seen many things in her years of teaching. "Your Grace, if I may be so bold, your interest in Miss Whitfield seems to extend beyond her professional qualifications." Harry felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he didn't deny it. "She's extraordinary. I've never met anyone quite like her." "She's also been badly hurt," Miss Thompson said gently. "It will take time for her to trust that someone truly values her for who she is." "I have time," Harry said, watching as Carol knelt down to speak with a young student who had approached her shyly. "All the time in the world." Over the following weeks, Carol threw herself into her new role with an enthusiasm that amazed everyone around her. She developed new teaching methods, created programs to help students transition from school to employment, and established a lending library that served not just the schools, but the entire local community. But it was her relationship with the students that truly set her apart. Having experienced rejection and dismissal herself, she had an instinctive understanding of children who felt overlooked or undervalued. "Miss Whitfield," young Emma Davies said one afternoon, tugging on Carol's skirt as she visited the primary school, "My mama says I'm too stupid to learn letters properly." Carol knelt down to Emma's level, her heart aching for the little girl's pain. "Emma, your mama is wrong. You're not stupid at all. Sometimes our minds just work differently, and we need to find the right way to learn. Would you like me to show you a special way to remember your letters?" For the next hour, Carol worked with Emma using techniques she had developed based on her own struggles with feeling inadequate. By the end of the session, Emma was proudly writing her own name. "I did it!" Emma exclaimed, her face glowing with pride. "I really did it!" "Yes, you did," Carol said, hugging the little girl. "And you can do anything you set your mind to, Emma. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Harry, who had been watching from the doorway, felt his heart constrict with emotion. Carol's natural compassion and understanding made her more than just a teacher. She was a healer, helping children overcome the same wounds that had been inflicted on her. "You have a gift," he said later, as they walked through the estate gardens together, a routine that had developed over the past few weeks. I just understand what it feels like to be told you're not good enough, Carol replied, her voice quiet but steady. No child should have to feel that way. No one should have to feel that way, Harry corrected gently, including you. Carol glanced at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Your Grace, you've already done more for me than I ever dreamed possible. You've given me purpose, independence, a chance to make a difference. I've given you what you deserved all along, Harry said, stopping beside a rose arbor that was just beginning to bloom. Carol, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever think about the future? About what you want from life beyond your work here? Carol was quiet for a moment, considering the question. A month ago, she would have said she wanted nothing more than to survive, to find some small corner of the world where she could exist without being a burden. But now, I think about having a family someday, she said softly. Children who would know they were loved and wanted. A home filled with warmth and laughter instead of silence and disapproval. And a husband? Harry asked, his voice carefully neutral. Carol felt her cheeks warm. I suppose so. Though I'm not sure any man would want someone with my background. I have no dowry, no family connections, no social standing. Harry turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense. Carol, any man worthy of you wouldn't care about those things. You have intelligence, compassion, strength, and beauty that goes far deeper than surface appearances. You have a heart that can heal wounded children and a mind that can revolutionize education. What more could any reasonable man want? The way he was looking at her made Carol's breath catch. There was something in his expression that went beyond professional respect or even friendship. Something that made her heart race and her hands tremble. Your Grace, Harry, he said softly. When we're alone like this, I'd like you to call me Harry. Harry, she whispered, and the sound of his name on her lips made him step closer. Carol, I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with pity or charity. You're not a project to be rescued. You're an extraordinary woman who has captured my heart completely. Carol stared at him in disbelief. Your heart? I'm in love with you, Harry said simply. I think I have been since that first day at Lady Pemberton's luncheon, when you spoke so passionately about education reform. You were the most real person in that room, the only one who seemed to care about something beyond social advancement. But I'm nobody, Carol protested, even as her heart soared. I'm the unwanted daughter of a minor lord, with no fortune, no connections. You're the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with, Harry interrupted, reaching out to cup her face gently in his hands. You're intelligent, compassionate, strong and beautiful. You've transformed my schools, my estate and my life in ways I never thought possible. Harry, Carol breathed, leaning into his touch despite herself. I know this is sudden, he continued, his thumbs tracing the delicate line of her cheekbones. I know you need time to trust that this is real, that I'm not going to disappear or change my mind, but I needed you to know how I feel. I feel the same way, Carol whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I've been trying not to, because it seems impossible, but I love you too. Harry's smile was radiant as he leaned down to rest his forehead against hers. Then we'll make it possible. We'll face whatever challenges come together. What about society? What about your duty to marry someone suitable? You are suitable, Harry said firmly. You're more than suitable. You're perfect. And if society doesn't like it, they can adjust their expectations. Before Carol could protest further, Harry's lips found hers in a kiss that was gentle but filled with promise. Carol had never been kissed before, had never even imagined that such tenderness was possible. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard and smiling through tears of joy. Marry me, Harry said softly. Not because you need rescuing, but because I need you. Because together, we can build something beautiful. Yes, Carol whispered, her voice full of wonder. Yes, I'll marry you. As Harry pulled her into his arms again, Carol felt the last of her walls crumble. For the first time in her life, she was truly, completely loved. Not despite her background or circumstances, but for who she was as a person. The unwanted daughter had found not just acceptance, but a love that would transform her from a woman who believed she deserved nothing into a duchess who would spend her life ensuring that no child ever felt as worthless as she once had. Their love story was just beginning, but already it was changing both of their lives in ways neither had imagined possible. Facing the world news of the Duke of Halbrook's engagement to Carol Whitfield spread through London society like wildfire, creating a scandal that dominated every drawing room conversation and filled the gossip columns with speculation and outrage. "Have you heard?" Lady Worthington whispered to her companion at their weekly tea. "The Duke of Halbrook is engaged to that Whitfield girl, the illegitimate one who was thrown out by her own family." "It cannot be true," came the shocked reply. "Surely the Duke has more sense than to throw away his position for a woman of no standing." "I have it on the best authority. The announcement will be in tomorrow's papers." Similar conversations were taking place throughout the ton, with opinions ranging from shock to disapproval to outright condemnation. The idea that one of England's most eligible dukes would choose to marry a woman with no dowry, no connections, and a scandalous family situation was beyond their comprehension. At Whitfield Manor, the news hit like a thunderbolt. "This is impossible," Lord Whitfield raged, pacing his study, while Lady Margaret sat in stunned silence. "The Duke cannot possibly be serious about marrying Carol." "The announcement is quite clear," Victoria said, reading from the morning paper with a mixture of disbelief and envy. "His Grace the Duke of Halbrook is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Carol Whitfield, daughter of Lord Whitfield of Yorkshire. It even mentions the wedding date, 6 weeks from now." 6 weeks! Lady Margaret finally found her voice. "This is a disaster. What will people think? What will they say about our family?" "They'll say we were fools to cast off a daughter who was worthy of a duke," Charles observed dryly, "though I still can't understand what he sees in her." "We have to do something," Lady Margaret declared, rising from her chair with determination. "We cannot allow this marriage to proceed. It will ruin us all." "What exactly do you propose we do?" Lord Whitfield asked. "The Duke is not a man who can be intimidated or bribed." "We'll go to him," Lady Margaret said. "We'll explain that Carol has deceived him about her background, that she's unstable, unsuitable. Surely he'll listen to reason." Meanwhile, at Halbrook Estate, Carol was discovering that being engaged to a duke brought challenges she had never anticipated. The Morning Post had brought dozens of letters, some congratulatory, others decidedly less friendly. "Listen to this one," Harry said, reading from a particularly venomous missive. "Your Grace, surely you must realize that your intended bride is nothing more than a fortune hunter who has taken advantage of your charitable nature." The nerve of these people. Carol looked up from her own pile of correspondence, her face pale but determined. "Perhaps they're not entirely wrong. I am benefiting enormously from this marriage." "Carol," Harry said firmly, setting down the letter and moving to kneel beside her chair. "You are not a fortune hunter. You didn't pursue me. I pursued you. You didn't seek this engagement. I proposed to you. And you're not benefiting from this marriage any more than I am. But Harry, look at what I'm gaining. A title, wealth, position. What are you gaining except a wife with no social standing and a family that disowned her?" Harry cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I'm gaining the woman I love. I'm gaining a partner who shares my values and my vision for making the world better. I'm gaining someone who sees me as a man, not just a title. I'm gaining everything that matters." Before Carol could respond, Stevens appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace, Lord and Lady Whitfield are here to see you. They say it's a matter of urgent family business." Carol felt her blood turn to ice. "They're here? Shall I tell them you're not at home?" Harry asked, his voice gentle but his eyes hard. "No," Carol said, surprising herself with her firmness. "I'll see them. We'll see them together." "Are you certain?" "Yes. It's time I faced them as your equal, not as their unwanted dependent." When Lord and Lady Whitfield were shown into the drawing room, the tension was immediately palpable. Carol sat beside Harry on the sofa, her back straight and her chin raised, while her father and stepmother took seats across from them. "Your Grace," Lord Whitfield began, his tone carefully respectful but strained, "we've come to discuss this situation with Carol." "What situation would that be?" Harry asked coolly. "This engagement, of course," Lady Margaret interjected. "Your Grace, we feel we must inform you of certain facts about Carol's character and background that may not have been made clear to you." "Please, enlighten me," Harry said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Carol has always been difficult," Lord Whitfield said. "Willful, disobedient, prone to romantic fantasies. We fear she may have misrepresented herself to you." "In what way?" Harry's tone could have frozen fire. She's led you to believe she's suitable for marriage to a man of your position, Lady Margaret said. But your grace, she has no dowry, no connections, no training in the duties of a duchess. She would be a liability to you socially and politically. Carol felt the familiar sting of their words, but this time Harry's presence beside her gave her strength. I see, she said quietly. And what exactly are you proposing? We're willing to take you back, Lord Whitfield said, as if offering a great favor. If you end this engagement now, before it goes any further, we'll welcome you home and find you a suitable position as a governess or companion. You can live quietly and respectably without causing scandal for anyone. How generous, Carol said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You're willing to take back the daughter you threw out for accepting a social invitation. We're trying to save you from making a terrible mistake, Lady Margaret insisted. Do you really think the Duke will be happy with a wife who embarrasses him at every social function? Do you think his friends and family will accept you? I think, Harry said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, that you've said quite enough. Lord and Lady Whitfield turned to him in surprise, clearly having expected him to be swayed by their arguments. Your Grace, Lord Whitfield began, surely you can see... I can see that you're attempting to undermine the woman I love based on prejudices and cruelties that say far more about your character than hers, Harry interrupted, rising to his feet. I can see that you've spent 24 years trying to convince Carol that she's worthless, and now you're angry that someone finally sees her true value. Your Grace, you don't understand, Lady Margaret protested. I understand perfectly, Harry said, his voice cold with fury. I understand that you treated your own daughter as a servant, denied her the love and support she deserved, and then cast her out when she finally stood up for herself. I understand that you're here not out of concern for her welfare, but because you're embarrassed that the daughter you rejected is about to become a duchess. Carol felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude and love, not pain. Harry was defending her with a fierce protectiveness that made her heart soar. The truth is, Harry continued, Carol is everything I could want in a wife. She's intelligent, compassionate, strong, and beautiful. She's transformed my charitable works and brought joy to my life. She will make an extraordinary duchess because she understands what it means to serve others rather than simply enjoying privilege. But the scandal, Lord Whitfield tried again, will die down quickly when people see what an asset she is to my family and my work, Harry finished. And frankly, I don't care what people think. I'm marrying the woman I love, not seeking approval from people whose opinions are based on ignorance and prejudice. Carol stood and moved to Harry's side, taking his hand in hers. Father, Lady Margaret, I appreciate your concern, but I'm going to marry Harry because I love him and he loves me. For the first time in my life, I'm with someone who values me for who I am, not who he thinks I should be. You're making a mistake, Lady Margaret said desperately. Both of you. This marriage will never work. On the contrary, Carol said, her voice strong and clear. This marriage will work because it's based on love, respect, and shared values. Everything yours lacks. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Lord Whitfield's face flushed with anger, while Lady Margaret looked as if she had been slapped. Very well, Lord Whitfield said stiffly, rising from his chair. If you're determined to proceed with this folly, don't expect any support from us. I don't, Carol replied calmly. I stopped expecting anything from you long ago. After they left, Carol collapsed into Harry's arms, shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline and emotion. That was terrifying, she admitted. You were magnificent, Harry said, holding her close. You stood up to them with such dignity and strength. I've never been prouder of anyone in my life. They're right about one thing, though, Carol said quietly. There will be scandal. People will talk. Let them talk, Harry said firmly. We'll prove them wrong by being happy, by building a marriage based on love and partnership, by showing them that worth isn't determined by bloodlines or bank accounts. As they stood together in the drawing room where Carol had just faced down her family's cruelty and won, both of them knew that their love would be tested by society's disapproval and prejudice. But they also knew that together they could face anything. The unwanted daughter and the honorable Duke were about to prove that love could triumph over convention, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin when someone finally sees your true worth. The wedding and new beginnings. The wedding of the Duke of Halbrook and Carol Whitfield took place on a perfect spring morning at the estate's private chapel, surrounded by people who had come to genuinely celebrate their union rather than simply observe a social spectacle. Carol stood before the mirror in her bridal chamber, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. The wedding gown was a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that Harry had insisted on commissioning from London's finest dressmaker. But it wasn't the expensive dress that transformed her, it was the radiance that came from being truly, deeply loved. "You look beautiful, my dear," said Mrs. Henderson, the estate manager's wife who had become like a mother to Carol over the past months. "His Grace is the luckiest man in England." "I think I'm the lucky one," Carol replied, touching the simple pearl necklace that had been Harry's gift to her. "6 months ago, I thought I would spend my life invisible and unwanted. Now you're about to marry a man who adores you and become a duchess, who will use her position to help others." Mrs. Henderson finished with a smile. "It's like a fairy tale, but better because it's real." The chapel was filled with an unusual mix of guests, members of the nobility who genuinely supported the match, local families whose children attended the estate schools, teachers and staff from Harry's charitable organizations, and even some of the older students who had insisted on being present to see their beloved Miss Whitfield become a duchess. Notably absent were the Whitfield family, who had made their disapproval clear by refusing to attend. But Carol found she didn't care. The people present were those who truly mattered, people who had seen her worth and celebrated her happiness. As the music began and Carol walked down the aisle, her eyes found Harry immediately. He stood at the altar in his formal morning coat, his blue eyes bright with love and joy. When their gazes met, everything else faded away. The whispered comments from society guests, the elaborate decorations, even her own nervousness. There was only Harry, waiting for her with a smile that made her heart soar. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Harry and Carol in holy matrimony. This is not merely the joining of two lives, but the celebration of a love that has triumphed over adversity and prejudice." As they exchanged vows, Carol felt the weight of her past finally lifting from her shoulders. When Harry promised to love and cherish her, to value her thoughts and support her dreams, she knew he meant every word. When she promised to stand beside him as his partner and equal, she felt the strength that came from finally knowing her own worth. "You may kiss your bride," the vicar announced, and Harry's kiss was tender and full of promise for their future together. The wedding breakfast was held in the estate's grand ballroom, but the atmosphere was warm and intimate, despite the formal setting. Harry had insisted on including all their guests, from dukes to dairymaids, in the celebration, creating an unprecedented mixing of social classes that would be talked about for years to come. "To the Duke and Duchess of Halbrook," toasted Lord Pemberton, one of Harry's oldest friends who had supported the match from the beginning. "May your marriage be blessed with happiness, purpose, and the continued success of your remarkable partnership." As the celebration continued, Carol found herself in conversation with Lady Thornton, an elderly duchess who had become one of her strongest supporters. "My dear," Lady Thornton said, "you've caused quite a stir in society, you know. Half the mothers in London are furious that their daughters didn't catch the Duke's attention, and the other half are wondering if they should start valuing character over connections in their own children." "I hope some good comes of it," Carol replied. "If our marriage helps even one person realize that worth isn't determined by birth, then any scandal will have been worthwhile." "Spoken like a true duchess," Lady Thornton said approvingly. "You're going to do wonderful things in your new position." Later that evening, as the last guests departed, and Carol and Harry found themselves alone in the estate's rose garden, they reflected on the day and their future together. "How does it feel to be a duchess?" Harry asked, pulling her close as they walked among the blooming flowers. "Surreal," Carol admitted, "but also right, somehow. As if this is what I was meant to become, even when I couldn't see it myself." "You were always worthy of the title," Harry said softly. "You just needed someone to recognize it. And you needed someone to see past your title to the man beneath," Carol replied, reaching up to touch his face. "We saved each other, didn't we?" "We did indeed." As they stood together in the moonlit garden where their love had first bloomed, both Carol and Harry felt the deep satisfaction that comes from finding not just love, but purpose. Their marriage was more than a romantic union. It was a partnership that would allow them to change lives and challenge conventions. The legacy of love. 5 years later, the nursery at Halbrook Estate was filled with afternoon sunlight and the sound of a child's delighted laughter. Carol sat in the rocking chair by the window, holding their 3-year-old son, William, while Harry read from a book of fairy tales. And they lived happily ever after, Harry concluded, closing the book with a flourish that made William clap his hands in delight. "Again, Papa?" the little boy demanded, his blue eyes, so like his father's, sparkling with enthusiasm. "I think that's enough stories for now," Carol said, smoothing William's dark hair. "It's time for your nap." As Harry carried their son to his bed, Carol reflected on how much their lives had changed. The scandal of their marriage had indeed died down, replaced by admiration for their charitable work and the obvious happiness of their union. Carol had proven herself to be everything Harry had believed she could be, an intelligent, compassionate duchess who used her position to advocate for education reform and children's welfare. "He's asleep," Harry said, returning to find Carol still by the window. "What are you thinking about?" "How different everything is from what I once imagined," Carol replied, leaning into his embrace. 5 years ago, I thought I would spend my life invisible and alone. Now I have you, William, our work, this wonderful life we've built together. And you've given me everything I never knew I was missing," Harry said, kissing the top of her head. "A true partner, a loving wife, a beautiful son, and a purpose that goes beyond managing estates and attending Parliament." Their charitable work had expanded significantly over the years. The schools on the estate now served as models for educational reform throughout England, and Carol's innovative teaching methods were being adopted by institutions across the country. They had also established a foundation to help young women from disadvantaged backgrounds receive education and training for independent careers. "Mrs. Thompson sent word that 3 more of our girls have been accepted to teaching positions," Carol said, referring to their latest graduates, "including Emma Davies. Do you remember her? The little girl who thought she was too stupid to learn? The one you worked with when you first arrived? That's wonderful news. She's going to teach at a school in Manchester. She says she wants to help other children who feel as lost as she once did." Harry smiled, thinking of how many lives Carol had touched through her work. "You've created a legacy, you know. All these children you've helped, all these teachers you've trained, they'll go on to help others, and the circle will keep expanding. We've created it together," Carol corrected. "I never could have done any of this without your support and resources. And I never would have thought to do it without your vision and compassion." As they stood together watching their son sleep, both Carol and Harry felt the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. Their love story had begun with rejection and abandonment, but it had grown into something beautiful and meaningful, a partnership that had not only brought them happiness, but had made the world a little bit better. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met?" Carol asked. "I try not to," Harry replied with a shudder. "I probably would have married some suitable but vapid society girl and spent my life wondering why I felt so empty. And you, I would have found some position as a governess or companion, lived quietly and alone, and never known what it felt like to be truly loved. But we did meet," Harry said firmly, "and we found each other despite all the obstacles. That has to mean something." "It means that love really can triumph over everything else," Carol said softly. "It means that sometimes the people who seem to have the least to offer actually have the most to give. It means that true worth isn't determined by circumstances of birth, but by strength of character and capacity for love." As the afternoon sun slanted through the nursery windows, casting golden light on their sleeping son and illuminating the faces of 2 people who had found in each other everything they had ever dreamed of, Carol and Harry knew that their story was far from over. They had many more years ahead of them, many more lives to touch, many more barriers to break down. But they would face it all together, as partners and equals, proving every day that love based on mutual respect and shared values could overcome any obstacle society might place in its path. The unwanted daughter had become a beloved duchess, not through marriage alone, but through her own merit and the unwavering support of a man who had seen her true worth from the very beginning. And together, they had created a legacy that would inspire others for generations to come, a legacy that proved that everyone, no matter how humble their beginnings, deserves to be loved and valued for who they truly are. Their son would grow up knowing he was cherished, just as any children they might have in the future would know the same. And through their schools and charitable work, hundreds of other children would learn that they too had worth and potential, regardless of their circumstances. It was, Carol thought as Harry's arms tightened around her, the most beautiful ending she could have imagined, except it wasn't really an ending at all. It was just the beginning of a lifetime of love, purpose, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from making the world a better place, one child at a time. Their love story became a beacon of hope for all who knew them. Proof that true worth lies not in titles or wealth, but in the courage to love deeply and the wisdom to see beyond surface appearances to the heart beneath. The Duke and Duchess of Halbrook showed the world that the most beautiful love stories often begin in the darkest places, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected packages. They proved that love, when it is real and true, has the power to heal old wounds, break down barriers, and create a legacy that will inspire others for generations to come.